Go on then, old-timer. Fire her up. Captain Davis's voice dripped with mockery as he gestured toward the A-10 Thunderbolt II, squatting on the tarmac like a gray predator. The aircraft's massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon jutted from its nose, a 7-barreled promise of destruction that had earned it the nickname Warthog. Roger Bentley, 82 years old, stood beside the landing gear. His hand rested on the sun-warmed metal. He wore a faded leather jacket, despite the sweltering heat, a scorpion patch, barely visible on the shoulder. He said nothing. The crowd of young airmen shifted uncomfortably. They'd been asking the old man about his jacket when the captain arrived, ego bristling at his subordinates, giving attention to a civilian. "What's the matter?" Davis smirked. "Forget how to turn the key?" Roger's weathered eyes remained on the aircraft, not on the cockpit, on the nose, on the cannon, on the weapon he knew more intimately than his own heartbeat. But what was about to be revealed would change everything. The sun hammered down on Randolph Air Force Base's flight line, with the brutal intensity only a Texas summer could deliver. Heat waves shimmered off the concrete, making the distant hangars dance like mirages. It was Family Day, an annual event where the base opened its gates to show the public what billions in taxpayer dollars had bought. Static aircraft displays lined the tarmac, a gleaming F-16, a hulking C-130, and there, at the far end, an A-10 Thunderbolt II. The Warthog was the ugly duckling of military aviation, built around its gun rather than the other way around. It was slow, ungainly, and utterly lethal. To the untrained eye, it looked outdated. To those who knew, it was a flying legend. Roger Bentley had wandered to the A-10 without conscious thought, drawn by something deeper than memory. His feet had carried him across the hot tarmac, while his mind drifted through decades. He approached Tail 7806-1D8 like a man visiting an old friend's grave, respectful, reverent, haunted. His hand had just touched the massive front tire when the first airman appeared. "Sir? You served?" The young man, barely 22, had noticed the leather jacket. In this heat, only someone with a story would wear such a thing. "Long time ago," Roger replied, his voice a gravelly whisper. Two more airmen drifted over, curiosity overcoming the usual reluctance to engage civilians. One of them, Airman Garcia, pointed at the scorpion patch. "What unit is that?" Roger's finger traced the faded embroidery. 3rd Ranger Battalion. They gave it to me after what? That's when Captain Marcus Davis arrived. He'd been holding court near the F-16, regaling families with stories of modern air superiority, when he noticed his airmen clustered around the A-10. More specifically, around an old man who clearly didn't belong on an active flight line. "Gentlemen," Davis's voice cracked like a whip. The airmen snapped to attention. "Don't you have duties?" "Sir, we're just—" "I don't recall asking for excuses, airman." Davis turned his attention to Roger, his eyes scanning from the worn boots to the weathered jacket. His lip curled. "Sir, this is a restricted area. I'm going to need to see your visitor credentials." Roger slowly reached into his jacket. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, but instead of pulling out a badge, he simply let his hand rest over the inside pocket. "I was invited by Colonel Matthews," Roger said quietly. Colonel Matthews. Davis's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. "The wing commander personally invited you?" "We flew together, Vietnam." The captain's smirk widened. He'd heard this before. Old men clinging to glory days, embellishing their service records, desperate for relevance. He glanced at Roger's chest. No medals, no ribbons, no proof. "Right, Vietnam." Davis crossed his arms. "Tell you what, old-timer. Since you know so much about the Warthog, why don't you show these boys how she works? Go ahead. Start her up." The airmen exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was crossing a line. Garcia opened his mouth to protest, but Davis silenced him with a look. Roger's hand dropped from his jacket. For a long moment, he simply stared at the aircraft. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried a weight that made everyone lean in. "The auxiliary power unit requires a ground check before ignition sequence. Hydraulic pressure needs to be stable at 3,000 psi. You don't just turn a key." The technical accuracy threw Davis off for half a second. He recovered quickly. "Oh, we've got a real expert here." He turned to the gathering crowd, playing to his audience. "Look, Grandpa, I appreciate your enthusiasm for our aircraft, but this is a very expensive, very dangerous piece of equipment. We can't have civilians climbing all over it. So please, step away from the plane and head back to the public area." The dismissal was absolute. The insult, crystal clear. Roger didn't move. His eyes shifted from the aircraft to the captain's polished boots, his crisp flight suit, the silver bars that gleamed in the sun. He saw a man who wore a uniform but had no concept of what it could cost. "I'm not a civilian," Roger said. Davis let out a short laugh. "Right. And I'm the chief of staff. Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Show me your visitor pass, or I'm calling security." The crowd was larger now. Families stopped to watch the confrontation. The scene was stark. The young captain, all sharp angles and polish, and the old man, weathered as the leather on his back, standing before the deadliest ground attack aircraft ever built. Davis was enjoying this. He saw it as a simple matter of enforcing regulations, of putting a confused old man in his place. He had no idea he was standing on sacred ground. Anyone watching closely might have noticed the subtle change in Roger's posture. The way his shoulders squared, the way his eyes hardened, the way his breathing slowed. Because in his mind, the Texas heat was replaced by biting cold at 15,000 feet. The murmur of the crowd faded, replaced by the high-pitched whine of twin turbofan engines and the crackle of a panicked voice on the radio. "Any air support in the area? This is Ranger 6 Actual. We are pinned down, taking heavy fire. We are being overrun." The memory hit Roger like a physical blow. But outwardly, he remained still. A rock in the stream of the captain's fury. What Captain Davis didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that he wasn't just insulting a veteran. He was mocking a ghost, a legend, a man who had turned this very aircraft into an instrument of salvation for dozens of men who would have died without him. And across the base, in the wing commander's office, a phone was ringing. Colonel Richard Matthews was signing paperwork when his desk phone rang. He almost didn't answer. Family Day was his least favorite event, all smiles and handshakes and pretending the job wasn't slowly grinding him down. But the caller ID showed it was from the flight line security office. "Matthews." "Sir, this is Sergeant Reeves at Checkpoint 3. We've got a situation developing near the A-10 display. One of your captains is having a confrontation with a civilian. It's getting heated." Matthews pinched the bridge of his nose. "Can't you handle it?" "Sir, the civilian claims he knows you, says his name is Roger Bentley." The pen in Matthews' hand clattered to the desk. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Roger Bentley. The name hit him like a physical force, dragging him back across 40 years. "Describe him," Matthews said, his voice tight. "Elderly, sir, white hair, wearing a leather jacket with some kind of patch. A scorpion." "Yes, sir." "How did you—" "What captain?" "Captain Marcus Davis, sir. He's demanding to see credentials and—" Matthews was already standing, already moving. "Do not let Davis touch that man. I'm on my way." He grabbed his cap and burst through the door so fast his aide jumped. "Sir, get me a vehicle, now, and call the command chief. Tell him to meet me at the flight line." As the staff car raced toward the tarmac, Matthews's hands were shaking. Not from anger yet. That would come later. From memory. From the weight of a debt he could never repay. 1991. Saudi Arabia. Operation Desert Storm. Captain Richard Matthews, 28 years old, shot down over enemy territory. His F-16 had taken a missile hit, and he'd ejected into a nightmare, miles behind Iraqi lines with Republican Guard units hunting him. He'd lasted 3 days. 3 days of hiding in burned-out buildings, drinking from puddles, watching enemy patrols pass within feet of his hiding spots. On the third night, he'd activated his emergency beacon, knowing it was suicide, but no longer caring. That's when he heard it, the distinctive growl of an A-10's twin engines. Through the darkness, a voice on his survival radio. "Viper 2-3, this is Hog 1-1. I've got your position. Stay down. I'm coming to get you." What followed was the most beautiful and terrifying 30 minutes of Matthews's life. The A-10 circled overhead like a guardian angel, its cannon ripping apart every enemy position within a mile radius. When the rescue helicopter arrived, the pilot, Major Roger Bentley, stayed on station, burning through every last round to keep Matthews alive. Matthews never forgot the voice, never forgot the man who'd ignored direct orders to return to base, who'd flown into a hornet's nest of anti-aircraft fire, who'd put his own life on the line for a pilot he'd never met. The staff car screeched to a halt at the flight line. Matthews didn't wait for it to stop completely. He was out and moving, his long strides eating up the distance. He saw the crowd first, then Captain Davis, chest puffed out, finger pointing at an old man in a leather jacket. The old man stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, face expressionless. But Matthews knew that face. Even aged by decades, even weathered by time, he knew it. The crowd parted as Matthews approached. His rank demanded it. But it was the look on his face, a mixture of fury and reverence, that made people step back. "Captain Davis!" The shout cracked across the flight line like thunder. Davis spun, saw the wing commander bearing down on him, and snapped to attention. "Sir, I was just—" "Be silent." Matthews didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on Roger Bentley. The old man's face finally showed emotion, a flicker of recognition, a slight smile. "Hello, Ricky," Roger said softly. Matthews stopped 3 feet away. And then, in front of 200 people, the wing commander of Randolph Air Force Base snapped to the sharpest, most perfect salute of his career. "Major Bentley," his voice cracked with emotion. "It is an honor, sir." The crowd went dead silent. Airman Garcia's mouth fell open. The families stopped their chatter. Captain Davis felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Roger returned the salute with a simple nod. Matthews held it for 5 full seconds before dropping his hand. Then he turned to face Davis, and the fury that had been building finally found its release. "Captain, in my office. 1 hour. Service dress uniform." His voice was ice and steel. "Dismissed." Davis's face drained of color. "Sir, I didn't. Now." The captain fled. Matthews turned back to the crowd, his voice carrying the full weight of command. "For those who don't know, you're standing in the presence of Major Roger Bentley, United States Air Force, retired. During Operation Desert Storm, Major Bentley, call sign Deadeye, flew this exact aircraft for over 2,000 hours. He is credited with the destruction of 23 enemy tanks, 16 armored personnel carriers, and saving the lives of countless soldiers on the ground. He paused, letting it sink in. Then he pointed at the scorpion patch. That patch was given to him by the commander of the 3rd Ranger Battalion. It represents a mission where Major Bentley single-handedly engaged and destroyed an entire enemy mechanized company that had ambushed a platoon of Rangers. He saved every single one of them after taking a missile hit to his starboard engine. He flew this bird back to base with half a wing on fire and refused to eject because he was worried the plane would crash into a civilian village. The silence was absolute. Then, slowly, one airman started to clap, then another. Soon, the entire crowd was applauding, and Roger Bentley, the man who'd flown into hell and brought angels home, simply stood there with tears in his eyes. The applause faded, but the atmosphere on the flight line had fundamentally changed. What had been a casual family day gathering had transformed into something sacred. The airmen stood straighter. The civilians watched with reverent silence. Even the children seemed to sense they were witnessing something important. Colonel Matthews placed a hand on Roger's shoulder. "I didn't know you were coming today, sir. If I had, I didn't tell anyone," Roger said quietly. "I just wanted to see her again." His eyes drifted back to the A-10. "It's been a long time." Matthews understood. For men like Roger Bentley, the aircraft wasn't just a machine. It was a partner, a weapon, a sanctuary. It was the difference between life and death for dozens of men who never knew the name of the pilot who saved them. "Would you like to sit in the cockpit?" Matthews asked. "For old times' sake?" Roger's weathered hand reached out, touching the landing gear strut. His fingers traced the metal like a blind man reading Braille. "I can still feel it," he whispered. "The vibration when the gun fires, the way she shudders when you put her into a dive, the smell of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel." A young voice interrupted. "Sir?" It was Airman Garcia, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and awe. "I'm sorry about before. We didn't know. We should have—" Roger turned to him with a gentle smile. "You have nothing to apologize for, son. You were curious. That's good. That's how we learn." He looked at the small group of airmen who had gathered. "You want to know about this bird?" They nodded eagerly, a stark contrast to the mockery of minutes before. Roger walked slowly along the fuselage, his hand trailing across the metal skin. The A-10 was designed to do one thing: keep soldiers alive. Every other fighter jet is built for speed, for altitude, for glory. This plane? He patted the hull. This plane is built for mud and blood and keeping your brothers alive when hell is raining down on them. He stopped beneath the massive cannon. This is the GAU-8 Avenger. Fires 3,900 rounds per minute, 30mm depleted uranium shells. When you pull the trigger, the entire aircraft slows down from the recoil. It sounds like the hand of God, tearing the sky apart. The airmen were mesmerized. This wasn't a lecture from a manual. This was lived experience, spoken by a man who had transformed technical specifications into salvation. "The first time I fired it in combat," Roger continued, his eyes distant. "I was covering a convoy that had been ambushed in a mountain pass. 6 Humvees pinned down by enemy positions on both ridges. I came in low, maybe 50 feet off the deck, and made 4 passes. By the 3rd pass, my right engine was on fire. By the 4th, I had 17 warning lights lit up on my panel." "Did you make it back?" Garcia asked breathlessly. Roger smiled. "I'm standing here, aren't I?" Colonel Matthews checked his watch. "Sir, I have something I need to take care of. Would you be comfortable if I left you with Airman Garcia and his team? They can give you a proper tour." Roger nodded. He knew where Matthews was going, what needed to happen. As Matthews strode away toward the operations building, his jaw was set in granite. The door to his office opened with enough force to make his aide jump. "Sir, Captain Davis is waiting in the conference room." "Good." Captain Marcus Davis stood at attention when Colonel Matthews entered. The young officer's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He'd had an hour to think about what he'd done, an hour to realize the magnitude of his mistake. "Sir, You will speak when spoken to, Captain." Matthews's voice could have cut steel. He circled Davis like a predator. "Do you know why you're here?" "Yes, sir." "No, you don't." Matthews stopped directly in front of him. "You think you're here because you disrespected an elderly veteran. That's bad enough. But that's not why you're here." Davis's eyes flickered with confusion. "You're here because you represent everything that is wrong with today's officer corps. Arrogance without wisdom, authority without humility, power without understanding." Matthews walked to his desk and pulled out a folder. He opened it, scanning the pages. "Captain Marcus Davis, graduated from the academy 4 years ago. Top third of your class, pilot training at Shepherd, F-16 qualification. Currently serving as a flight instructor." He closed the folder. "On paper, you're a solid officer." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "But paper doesn't show me what kind of man you are. Today, you showed me. You saw an elderly man in a leather jacket, and you saw weakness. You saw someone to mock, to belittle, to dismiss. You looked at a living legend and saw nothing. Sir, if I had known, that's the problem." Matthews's shout made Davis flinch. "You should have known. Not because of who he was specifically, but because every veteran deserves respect. Every person wearing the evidence of their service deserves the benefit of the doubt. You don't wait to find out if they're a hero before treating them with dignity." Matthews pulled out another piece of paper. "This is Major Bentley's citation for the Silver Star. 1 of 3 he earned. Do you know what it says?" Davis shook his head mutely. "It says that, on February 26, 1991, Major Bentley ignored direct orders to return to base when his aircraft was critically damaged. Instead, he remained on station to provide close air support for a downed F-16 pilot being hunted by enemy forces. He expended all remaining ammunition, then flew repeated dry passes. That means unarmed passes, Captain, to keep enemy forces suppressed until rescue arrived. He landed with less than 3 minutes of fuel remaining and holes in his fuselage you could stick your fist through." Matthews's eyes bore into Davis. "That F-16 pilot was me." The color drained completely from Davis's face. "Without Major Bentley, I would have died in that desert. I wouldn't have gotten married. I wouldn't have had my 3 children. I wouldn't be standing here in front of you. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, exists because that man in the leather jacket decided my life was worth risking his own." The silence in the room was suffocating. "You mocked him, Captain. You belittled him. You ordered him off the flight line like he was a stray dog. You did this in front of my airmen, in front of families, in front of children who came here to see heroes." Matthew's voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "You're grounded, effective immediately. Pending a formal investigation, you will be reassigned to administrative duties. I am recommending a letter of reprimand for your permanent record, and if I had my way, you'd be out of my Air Force entirely." Davis's career was over. They both knew it. A letter of reprimand meant no promotion, no advancement, no future as a pilot. However, Matthews continued, "Major Bentley is a better man than I am. Before you arrived, I called him. Do you know what he said?" Davis couldn't speak. He said, "Don't destroy the boy over this. He made a mistake. Let him learn from it." "So here's what's going to happen, Captain. You're going to spend the next 6 months working with our Veterans Outreach Program. You're going to visit VA hospitals. You're going to attend funerals at Arlington. You're going to sit with old men and women and listen to their stories until you understand what you failed to see today. Matthews moved to the door. If, after 6 months, I see genuine growth and humility, I'll consider removing the letter. But make no mistake, you're on thin ice. One more incident, one more display of arrogance, and you're done. Dismissed. Davis saluted and fled. Alone in his office, Colonel Matthews sat down heavily in his chair. His hands were still shaking, not from anger anymore, but from the weight of memory, from the realization of how close he'd come to losing the man who'd given him a second chance at life. He picked up the phone and dialed. Airman Garcia, please tell Major Bentley that I'll meet him at the O Club in 30 minutes. Drinks are on me. We have 40 years to catch up on. The Officers' Club at Randolph AFB was a relic of another era. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, walls, covered with plaques and photos of units long disbanded and pilots long gone. It smelled of cigar smoke and history. Roger Bentley sat in a corner booth, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. He stared at the amber liquid, watching the light reflect off its surface. Across from him, Colonel Matthews nursed his own drink. I never properly thanked you, Matthews said quietly. That night in Saudi Arabia, when they finally got me on the helicopter, I was so dehydrated and exhausted I could barely speak. By the time I got back to base, you'd already been medevaxed to Germany for surgery. Roger waved a hand dismissively. You sent a letter. That was thanks enough. A letter. Matthews laughed bitterly. I wrote you a letter. You saved my life and I sent you a letter. Ricky, I did my job. Same as thousands of other pilots. No. Matthews's voice was firm. Not the same. I read your file. I pulled it after that night. Do you know what I found? Roger said nothing. 233 combat missions, over 2,000 combat hours, 3 silver stars, 2 distinguished flying crosses, a Purple Heart with oak leaf cluster, a Medal of Valor from the Army, and that scorpion patch, the Sand Scorpions, given to you by Rangers you pulled out of an ambush so hot the rescue choppers wouldn't even attempt it. Roger's jaw tightened. They were kids, 19, 20 years old. I could hear them on the radio, hear them dying. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to follow orders. You were supposed to return to base when your fuel hit minimum. You were supposed to let someone else handle it. Matthews leaned forward. But you didn't, because you're not built that way. Roger finally met his eyes. I lost men, Ricky. Over the years, I lost men I couldn't save. Heard them on the radio, watched them go down, got there too late. His voice cracked. So when I could make a difference, when I could be there in time, I didn't think about fuel or damage or orders. I thought about widows and mothers and children who wouldn't have to open that door and see men in dress uniforms standing on their porch. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Matthews nodded slowly. After you saved me, I spent 3 days in debriefing. They wanted to know everything, the shoot-down, the evasion, the rescue. And at the end, they asked me if I wanted to recommend you for a medal. You know what I said? You didn't have to. I said you deserved the Medal of Honor. I pushed for it hard. But the paperwork got lost, or someone decided it wasn't enough, or... He shook his head angrily. The system failed you, and I failed you. You didn't fail anyone, Roger said firmly. You got married, had kids, made colonel. That's all the medal I need, knowing you got to live your life. A server approached their table, but Matthews waved him away. For a moment, both men sat in silence, the weight of decades pressing down on them. What happened today? Matthews finally said. With Captain Davis. I wanted to destroy him for what he did to you. I know. That's why I asked you not to. He deserved it. Maybe. Roger took a small sip of his whiskey. But he's young. He made a mistake. The question is whether he learns from it or lets it embitter him. That's up to him now. Matthews studied his old friend. You're a better man than I am. No, just an older one. I've made enough mistakes to know everyone deserves a chance to grow. Roger's eyes drifted to a photo on the wall, a squadron photo from the 1990s, young pilots grinning in front of an A-10. You know what the hardest part of getting old is? What's that? Watching the world forget. Every year, fewer people remember Desert Storm. Fewer people remember what we did, why we did it. Those airmen today, Garcia and his friends, they were born after I retired. To them, I'm just an old man in a jacket. And that's okay. That's how it should be. But today they learned, Matthews countered. Today they heard your story. That means something. For today, maybe. But tomorrow, there'll be another Captain Davis. Another person who sees an old veteran and sees weakness. Or worse, sees nothing at all. And that's the cycle, Ricky. That's what we sign up for. We do the job, we come home, and eventually, we become invisible. Matthews felt a surge of anger at the resignation in Roger's voice. Not on my base, not while I'm in command. Every airman, every officer, everyone who steps foot on this installation will know your name. I'm going to mount a plaque on that A-10. I'm going to make your story required reading for every new pilot. You won't be invisible here. Roger smiled sadly. That's kind of you. But that's not why I came back. Then why did you? Roger was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I'm 82 years old, Ricky, and the doctors tell me I've got maybe a year left. Cancer. So I wanted to see her one more time. The bird. Tail 780618. I wanted to touch her, remember what it felt like to matter, to make a difference. The revelation hit Matthews like a physical blow. Roger, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Don't be. I've had a good run. Longer than a lot of the boys I flew with. He looked at his hands, gnarled and spotted with age. I just wanted one more day where I wasn't invisible. One more day where I was Deadeye Bentley, not just some old man taking up space. Matthews reached across the table and gripped Roger's hand. You were never just an old man. Not to me. Not to the men you saved. Not to anyone who knows your story. Maybe. But Captain Davis didn't know my story. And he's not wrong to see me the way he did. I am old. I am feeble. The man who flew that Warthog, who pulled those Rangers out of the fire, who saved your ass in the desert, he's gone. This is just what's left. No. Matthews's grip tightened. That man isn't gone. He's right here. The courage doesn't fade, Roger. The character doesn't diminish. You're still that pilot. You're still that hero. Age doesn't change that. For the first time, tears welled in Roger's eyes. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself. And then days like today happen, and I wonder if I've just been fooling myself, pretending I was something I'm not anymore. Listen to me, Matthews said forcefully. What Captain Davis did today was wrong, unforgivably wrong. But you know what made it wrong? Not that you're a decorated hero, not that you have medals and citations. What made it wrong is that he failed to see your dignity as a human being. Every old man in a leather jacket, every veteran, every person who has lived and struggled and survived, they all deserve respect, not because of what they've done, but because of who they are. Roger nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. They sat together for another hour, sharing stories, remembering fallen friends, laughing at old jokes. And when they finally stood to leave, Colonel Matthews wrapped his old friend in a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." "Thank you for remembering," Roger replied. As they walked out of the officers' club into the fading Texas sunlight, neither man knew that their story was about to reach far beyond Randolph AFB. Because Airman Garcia had recorded the confrontation. Not maliciously. He'd been documenting Family Day for the squadron social media. And that night, unable to shake what he'd witnessed, he posted it. The video went viral within hours. 3 weeks later, Roger Bentley received a call. It was from the Pentagon. The Secretary of the Air Force wanted to meet with him. They wanted to formally recognize his service in a ceremony at the National Air and Space Museum, where a restored A-10 Thunderbolt II would be dedicated in his honor. Roger declined politely. He didn't need ceremonies or recognition. He'd gotten what he came for. One last day with his old friend, one last moment where he wasn't invisible. But something else came from that day, on the flight line, at Randolph AFB. Captain Marcus Davis completed his 6 months in the Veterans Outreach Program. He sat with old men in VA hospitals and listened to their stories. He attended funerals at Arlington and watched families weep over flag-draped coffins. And slowly, painfully, he learned. A year later, on a cold morning in November, a funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery. Roger Bentley had finally taken his last flight. Colonel Matthews was there, of course, in his dress blues, standing at attention as the honor guard performed their duties with precision. But he wasn't alone. Dozens of airmen had made the trip, young pilots who had heard the story, who had learned the lesson. And standing in the back, unnoticed by most, was Captain Marcus Davis. After the service, after the flag had been folded and presented to Roger's daughter, after most of the mourners had drifted away, Davis approached the grave. He stood there for a long time. Then slowly, precisely, he saluted. "I learned," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me." Colonel Matthews, watching from a distance, felt tears stream down his face. Because in the end, that was Roger Bentley's greatest legacy. Not the tanks destroyed, or the lives saved, or the medals earned. It was the lesson, passed down through generations, that true valor doesn't shout, it whispers. That real heroes don't demand recognition. They simply do what must be done. And that respect isn't given to the uniform, but to the person who wears it, and to those who wore it long ago, who carry their service not on their chest, but in their heart. As the sun set over Arlington, casting long shadows across the white headstones, a single A-10 Thunderbolt II flew overhead in a final salute. A missing man formation for Deadeye Bentley, the ghost of the Warthog, the quiet guardian who saved so many and asked for nothing in return. Because at the end of the day, the truest valor never screams. It simply acts. If this story moved you, please share it. Remember the veterans in your life. Thank you to all who have served.